Damn them! Fight for all you're worth, soldiers! We've got to win this!
Sisters! Fight by my side!
It was the sudden appearance of a warp storm at the Kaurava System's outer edge that first caught the attention of the Imperium, and not just the Imperium. After hundreds of years under the neglectful watch of the Imperial Guard, nearly every force in the galaxy would descend upon the planet of Kaurava, bent only on domination and victory. 3 races had long dwelled in there. The Imperial Guard, its supposed rulers, the Orc tribes of Kaurava II, which the Guard had never successfully put down, and the Necron, who had slept undisturbed for untold millennia beneath Kaurava III. Where the Chaos Marines came from, or how, none can say. Did the Warp Storm bring them, or did they bring the Warp Storm? Both appeared suddenly on Kaurava IV, and in an eye blink, half the system's Imperial forces were gone, killed or claimed by the madness of chaos. In quick succession, the others flocked to Kaurava. The Space Marines, the Imperium's super soldiers, descended on Kaurava II, planning to finally cleanse the system, both of the troublesome Orks and the Chaos Marines, the sworn mortal enemies. The Tau appeared next, not far above, on one of the planet's moons. In the interests of protecting its ordered empire from the effects of human folly, the Tau came seeking to contain the Warp Storm, and in so doing, expand the territory's border. On their moon, they built a mighty fortress, and there forged a space cannon capable of interplanetary devastation. Among the wastes of Kaurava III, the Necrons, perhaps awakened by the disruptive forces of the Warp Storm, slowly massed their lethal legions. In quick response, webway gates, long unused, flickered to life, and Eldar poured forth, ready to battle their dark, death-dealing adversaries. Meanwhile, in the shadow of an ancient portal gate, the dark Eldar slipped stealthily out of the murky depths of the webway. They would be like carrion birds, flying above the battlefield, and when all were weary from the fight, make the battlefield into a feasting ground. Last to arrive, and perhaps most to be feared, were the Sisters of Battle, holy maidens and bearers of the God Emperor's faith. They had come to cleanse the system of corruption and filth. Their faith left them fanatical, unafraid of death and zealous in their cause. Nothing here was clean. All must be purged. Now, war rages anew, and only the victorious may write their history. Only the victorious will claim the planets of Kaurava. The Imperial Guard's headquarters in the Dusala precinct of the city planet of Kaurava I was also the system's primary Bane Blade production facility. Under the strong and capable leadership of the new Governor-General Vance Stubbs, the Guardsmen were once again well-supplied, armed, and organized. Any attacker would find themselves facing a formidable amount of firepower. Since the outbreak of the warp storm on Kaurava 4, the Imperial Guard had known a humbling series of setbacks. Losing a full 3/4 of their fighting men was just a start. General Stubbs was determined to triumph in the face of this and all other adversity. Unfortunately, a full regiment of Baneblade tanks, the Guard's armored superweapon, had that very day been dispatched to various territories throughout the Kaurava system. The Dusala Precinct headquarters was thus left without a single Baneblade to its advantage. But they had their factories. Repair parts, munitions, and operating crews were moved via a system of convoys to the centrally located Mars pattern buildings, which produced the tanks. These convoys, then, were to be the Imperial Guard's weakest link, and also their greatest hope.
How are the men?
Tolerable, sir.
Morale?
Good at central, poor on the front.
Casualties?
The same, sir.
Firing squads?
20 today, 12 for cowardice in the line of duty.
Baneblade production?
Tank crew, munitions and parts are arriving by convoy on schedule, sir. As you know, it takes only the most highly trained crew to properly operate a...
I know.
Very good, General.
How many do we have on hand?
Unfortunately, sir, a shipment of 100 Baneblades has just gone out to serve.
I see. Look at this. Once this was a fine city, gleaming beacon of the Emperor's light, a center of industry. Now look at it. Commissar, I would like to see this city built up again. I would like to see towers and spires of gleaming white. I would like to see our men on parade routes, not tours of duty. I would like to see every city in this planet, every colony in this besotted, miserable system turn to the service and industry of the Imperium in the Emperor's name.
In the Emperor's name, sir.
But to see my dreams fulfilled, first we must wipe the system clean of these blasted Xenos and heretics and monsters and zealots. And to do that, this base, our center of command, must operate free of danger or harassment. Our troops are ready. Our tanks and our sentinels. And if the Emperor wills it, we will have functioning Baneblades. Tell me, Commissar, are we prepared? Or will we be lambs taken to slaughter? Well, we'll do what we can and pray for victory. The enhanced Basilisk cannon has been prepared by our tech priest engineers, has it not? It can be fired at will.
Very good, General.
It only requires an artillery spotter. We shall place our faith in the God Emperor.
In the Emperor's name, sir.
That will have to do the job. As always, we place faith in the Emperor.
General, they approach.
Let them. When will we have our Baneblades?
Crew and munitions are arriving by convoy. It will be several convoys before we have one operational, sir.
So we just have to keep them busy until then.
Fiery retribution! In his name, we bring fiery retribution!
Our Mars pattern buildings. Well, the convoys are useless to us now. They've thrown a wrench in our Baneblade production. We're just gonna have to do without them. If they think that's all we've got up our sleeves... Officer, we fight until the last. Do you understand me?
Yes, sir.
crushed. Crushed! All the good men who gave their lives for this cursed, this blasted system. Though my army lies in ruins today, I have not done fighting, and I will remember who my enemies are.
Go, go, go! Canoness Selena Agna, from the very start of her campaign in the Kaurava conflict, had harbored great suspicion towards the Imperial Guard 252nd Conservator Regiment. Their presence in the system when the warp storm broke out was cause enough. But their stubborn, indeed blasphemous, refusal to lay down arms and accede to the governance of her Sisters of Battle was the final proof. For these reasons, the idea of making war on fellow Imperial soldiers did not trouble the Sisters. With steely conviction, purging flame, and heavy armor, the Sisters of Battle bore down on General Stubbs' army until it broke and scattered. The evident cowardice of the Guardsmen confirmed every suspicion of guilt the Canoness had ever harbored. Her original resolve was then renewed and redoubled. Every inch of the tainted system must be cleansed by fire. The Blood Ravens had learned the value of speed and mobility through hard battlefield experience. Force Commander Boreal, who had studied under the famed Commander Angelos, sought to make his reliance on stationary defensive structures as small as possible. Therefore, rather than build up the Space Marines' Central Command, entire companies were reserved in the fleet above Kaurava II. These would be ready to deep strike with deadly speed into any territory, including the Blood Raven's own headquarters. If attacked by an enemy, drop pods would cover the Marine stronghold in a steely, thunderous hail, swarming the Space Marines' enemies with super soldiers and dreadnoughts. Force Commander Boreal was sure of his plan. His greatest weapon was, after all, the superiority of the Space Marines themselves. Who could weather such a rapid and devastating defensive tactic?
Commander Boreal, enemy forces in our perimeter.
Where?
Southern Quadrant, but they were on the move. Current location unknown.
There is no time to be lost. Battle, brothers! Space Marines, today the enemy is at our door. We know our duty and we will do it. We fight for our honor as Blood Ravens, as Space Marines, and we fight in the name of the Emperor. And if we die this day, we die in glory. We die heroes' deaths, but we shall not die. No, it is the enemy who will taste death and defeat, as you know. Most of our battle brothers are stationed in space, prepared to deep strike. Our perimeter has been prepared in the event that our enemies should be so bold and so foolish. We have placed numerous beacons, allowing for multiple, simultaneous, and devastating defensive deep strikes. Codex Astartes names this maneuver Steel Rain. We will descend upon the foe. We will overwhelm them. We will leave none alive. Meanwhile, our ground forces will ensure the full defense of our headquarters. We are the Space Marines. We are the Emperor's Fury. Deep strike squads, prepare for deployment. Brothers, strike at will.
Assault Team Bravo! Attack!
We will be martyrs!
We have lost one of the deep strike beacons, sir.
Yes, we have.
Sir, every beacon we lose reduces our ability to strike on the field.
Do you think I care if we lose a beacon or two? This is war! War! All we need is enough battle brothers on the ground that we can crush them under our boot heels and destroy them with our bolters. That is what matters, Space Marine.
Daughters of the Emperor, march!
Those Rhino transports are giving them the advantage of speed. If we could find the machine cult buildings producing them, it might slow them down.
Fire the orbital bombardment, immediately!
Sir, they're right on top of us. The collateral!
Fire!
No
We are
pity for the
Space
foe.
Marines! If we are to die,
In
our
his
enemies
name
will
we
die
bring
beside
fiery
us!
retribution.
Yeah!
We have failed. The Emperor.
Due to their long association with the Inquisition, the Sisters of Battle have often taken it upon themselves to determine corruption among the other branches of the Imperial Armed Forces. After witnessing the prevalence of chaos in the Kaurava system, Confessor Triganum March advised Canoness Agna that any refusal to cede authority to the Sisterhood was clear evidence of heresy. When the Blood Ravens stood their ground, the Canoness acted quickly. Her mandate was clear. As heretics, they must be obliterated. Soldier for soldier, the Sisters of Battle could not compete with the Space Marines. Nevertheless, the Adepta Sororitas carried the day with their purging flames and acts of faith. Any survivors were shown the mercy of battlefield confession, which was far quicker and less painful than proper Inquisition proceedings. It was regrettable that so many Space Marines had to die. It was regrettable that they had come under suspicion of taint. But whatever the circumstances, corruption must be fought and at all costs wiped out. The vast Tau military complex on Kaurava II's second moon had always been intended for purposes above and beyond the current war. In a Tau-dominated solar system, this complex would become a key outpost on the Empire's border. This moon base had been named Nan Yanoi, or Sword Moon, referring to the powerful Arca cannon built there. This weapon could fire its devastating ion beam on any territory of any planet in the system. Heavy fortifications and anti-aircraft arrays were not enough for the Earth-cast architects of Nan Yanoi. To these, they added an ambitious orbital perimeter defense system, which would fire ion beams similar to that of the Arca cannon, tuned to harm only intruders and spare Nanyanoi's infrastructure from any damage. When complete, Nanyanoi would be unassailable. Unfortunately, the Tau stronghold was attacked before it was complete. Many systems and fortifications were not yet fully operational, including the perimeter defense system. An invasion fleet could be shot down, but they could not as easily protect against a small force from making a beachhead at one of the gaps in the Tau's outer defenses. Such a feat would be extraordinarily difficult, but it might just be possible.
We welcome your gracious presence, Aun Royu.
I see that our Earthcast engineers have made splendid progress in constructing the Nanyanoi base station.
Yes, Your Eminence, it is nearly complete. There are only a few gaps remaining in our perimeter defenses, and they are heavily guarded until our orbital defense system is fully operational.
Setting stabilizers. Ready to fire.
Excellent! And this Arca cannon you have built, quite a marvel, as I understand it.
Indeed. From this moon, we can fire on any habitable territory in the Kaurava system. Do you wish to inspect it yourself? It harms only advanced life forms, thus avoiding damage to structures and plant life.
This is indeed most commendable.
Our orbital defenses were built using the same technology. Both are controlled from this location.
What is that?
The perimeter has somehow been breached. I must attend to this. Please, Your Excellence, return to the Coalition Center.
Yes, that may be best.
Dispatch Pathfinders, locate the source of the breach, and see that they do not gain entrance and establish a foothold. Notify all Fire Warriors and Krut Carnivore squads. Let us hope that our defenses are strong enough to hold them.
Sisters, our aim is to breach these outer defenses with all due haste. From there, we must establish a beachhead from which to launch our attack.
Daughters of the Emperor, march! No pity! Know our place.
Excellent. The area has been cleared. Sisters, hear me! Make ready for war. Do so with haste. We must not tarry from our holy purpose.
Commander, Imperial, the orbital defense system has been activated and primed. It is now ready to fire. Is the enemy in our sights? Yes, Commander Oreska. But not all cooling systems are in place, and the cannon will overheat if fired too often. Well, fire as often as it is safe to do so. We must hold them off until our reinforcement fleet arrives.
Orbital defense is ready to fire.
Strategic point taken.
Commander, they have taken control of the orbital defense system. They use our defenses against us. It must be retaken. See to it. Target acquired. Aun Royu, noble ethereal,
adversaries, Canoness Selena Agna felt the Tau posed a singular threat. If allowed to complete their Nanyanoi moonbase, the Tau would have an almost impenetrable stronghold, which could do great damage to the Sisterhood's cause. Assuaging her fears, Confessor Turgenem March counseled the Canoness to place her faith in the Emperor's will. And as it happened, the Sisters of Battle were granted the opportunity to attack the Tau before the moonbase was complete. With much fire and many acts of faith, the alien compound was purged. Their commander and their false saint were slain. Canoness Agna took their skulls as offerings to the Emperor and tokens of her devotion. Some of the enemy's heretical technology was sent to the Ordo Zeno for study, and much of the rest was dutifully destroyed. It was no secret that it was the warbus Gorguts himself who led the Wa in the Kaurava conflict. But who were the Orks he led? Imperial records indicate that these Orks had always been in Kaurava, going back at least a millennium. It seems that when Gorguts arrived, they welcomed him as a long-awaited hero. These rugged Kauravan Orks had sometimes overrun the system's 4 planets, and sometimes been beaten back to their secret stronghold in the Rockclaw Mountains. There had never once been a successful attempt to breach the vast hideout there, and the Orks believed there never could be. But in the past, these Orks had always retreated to this place in great numbers at the first sign of defeat. Gorgut saw such behavior as un-Orky. He insisted that you had to take a bolter round or 2 if you wanted to win. And Gorguts lived only to win. Gorgut's strategy meant that the Orc stronghold was not invincible. But this did not mean that it was undefended. Reaching the lair was one thing. Penetrating its defenses was entirely another.
You see, Big Boss Gorguts? This here's the strongest and bestest Orkhold has ever held an Orc.
Oh, is that so, then?
Ain't no Yumi's got in here, ever. With the Rockclaw Mountains all round us, there's only one way in. Even if there was to get in, they'd have all the boys to face. Oh, and the knobs, and the tanks. Then there's the squig-offs.
Say they beat all that?
That's when we get them with the fighter bombers. We'd squash them to a pulp. We got watchers watching day and night. Nobody but an Orc gets close to us without we see them and crush them to smithereens. Boss! Boss! There's enemies in the camp! What? In the camp? We gotta stop them before they gets to the killing spot. Them drums! Beat the drums! Get to 'em!
What's this here killing spot?
Beat the drums! We've got to hold the killing spot!
Bestest Orkhold ever, huh?
Strike down our foes! They have erected a giant pennant of their wretched excuse for a faith. Sisters, we must cast it down!
Now we see if yous boys is worth to be called Orks!
Down our foes!
Oi, them's me special
Special Guard boys! Oh! They keep squashing everything they get to! Get them! He's coming this way! Send the bombers! Send the knobs! Send the tanks! Bring all the squig off! Whoa!
Now they're we are outnumbered!
My Orkhold! My beautiful Orkhold! I've had enough of this. Come on, boys. Let's get out of here.
The fact that the Imperium had shared a planetary system with the filthy Orc barbarians for hundreds of years, rather than promptly exterminating them, filled Canoness Selena Agna with disgust. Her sisters would tolerate such an infestation no more than the taints of heresy or mutation. Of course, the failures of the weak Imperial Guard had become compounded. The Orcs had been allowed to enter the dangerous war phase and could no longer be ignored. Cleaving to their sense of duty, and with a great deal of purging fire, the Sisters of Battle stormed the ancient Orc retreat in the Rocklaw Mountains and thoroughly routed their foes. The Canoness took her victory as a testament to their faith. When it was discovered, after the battle, that the war boss Gorguts had somehow escaped, she maintained that the Emperor had humbled them in their moment of victory, lest they grow too proud. Little was ever uncovered, and little will ever be known of how the warp storm was unleashed on the Kaurava system's fourth habitable planet. Whether guardsmen there grew corrupt and turned to evil worship, or whether the storm took them unawares, is an open question. What is without doubt is that at the storm's eye lay the lair of the Chaos Space Marines, and at the heart of this lair, a network of unholy and blood-stained shrines linked somehow inextricably to the storm itself. Although the lethal warp storm would flicker and squall here and there, ever shifting, a permanent conduit to the warp was maintained between these shrines. A charged field of immateria whirled there, certain death to any who had not given themselves over fully to chaos. In that radiant, deadly energy field, strange shapes could be seen dancing, screaming, howling. Any would-be conqueror of this unholy citadel would somehow have to dispel the chaos field that protected it. To enter it would be certain death, and while it stood, nothing could reach the forces of chaos that lurked at its center.
They come! They come!
Yes, we feel them. They approach. Their blood shall flow at our feet. Blood for the blood god! Yes, we shall slake our thirst for death, for chaos, for terror, yes!
They draw near. Let them come. The very ground will poison you. Demons will appear from the warp when your back is turned.
We shall lash out from every direction, and yours shall be the cries of death and horror! The sound of your doom will ring in your skull, in your soul. You shall tremble, and your blood shall be a gift to the Blood God! Let them come. We are ready.
That is the heretical shrine. Beware! It is an opening. Demons may enter there.
Sap my strength. No. I am strong. For here, the warp is strong. Is our power and your weakness. And you shall die. You will pay! Pay for tearing down my shrines! The veil is lifted, see? See the army I have. You have earned our wrath. We will spill your blood! No! We cannot lose! We cannot die! How can we?
Without our devotion, without our sacrifice.
Oh, the horrid blossom of chaos will wither! Will die! This world is slipping from our grasp.
The march into the black, corrupted heart of chaos was truly a great test of faith for the Sisters of Battle. They walked among the many abominations born of the warp, bearing witness to the desecrated forms of unfortunate guardsmen, Sisters of Battle, and Space Marines hung throughout the Dark City as victory trophies. But still they marched, under the firm guidance of Canoness Selena Agna, purging everything in their path. Ultimately, the unnatural powers of the Chaos Space Marines failed to unnerve or scatter the resolve of the Sisters of Battle, who took their foes with grit, steel, and a scourge of fire. The shrines were toppled, and the other works of the Alpha Legion were scattered and smashed. Lord Charon and many of his soldiers were cast back into the warp. Knowing the caution required when combating chaos, Canoness Agna ordered much of the region quarantined and kept under remote surveillance. Though the battle was won, there could be no vigilance too great. The Dark Eldar little feared an attack on their base of operations, situated as it was on the dark side of the moon, well within the reaches of the warp storm of Kaurava 4. The seventh ancient gate lay on that moon, but the Dark Eldar, knowing its technology well, had fixed it to work only for them when they had arrived there. The effect of this hubris and the general anarchic nature of Archon Terrell's soldiers resulted in a sprawling makeshift reproduction of Komorah, the Dark Eldar home city. Surrounding the major war camp lay smaller camps, surrounded by miles of torture ground, a sort of cage garden of the homunculus Grumman Nael's making. rich with plunder in slave scraps and goods. This area had grown and sprawled. Meanwhile, the center grew dense with powerful Dark Eldar, and the legendary Asdrubael Vecht, leader of Taril's Blackheart Cabal, was said to oversee the war preparations there. To say the Dark Eldar were unprepared for an attack would not be quite accurate. The Dark Eldar are ever ready for battle. It is a sport and a passion to their kind, and there is no such thing as catching them off their guard. Nonetheless, the miles of torture gardens were poorly attended at best, and full of prisoners, many still capable of turning against their captors. For an attacker, there was a faint glimmer of hope.
We are fresh from the fight. We have shed blood. Death, terror, and anguish sang sweetly in our ears.
But Lord Terry, have you taken prizes?
Do you doubt me, Crewmenea? Many prisoners were taken. We have our tribute to Conora, and many left over from our slave chambers, and your torture grounds.
Come, Archon! Come to my torture grounds. We win, we lose, win and lose. But always richer. Richer with slaves and spoils.
Indeed, we shall be well respected and rewarded when we return to Conora.
When we return, if we return. Return the victors. Return the vanquished. My grounds, where screams are flowers and pain their fragrance. A fine, fine nest we have. High upon the cliff, hard to see, hard still to reach. Will they reach this nest? Will they take away my garden?
Are you questioning my right to lead? My inevitable victory? I am the deadly shadow and the bird of prey. I am the poisoned dagger that brings swift death. These crude and foolish armies know nothing of strategy. If they see a wall, they attack it. If they see an army, they charge at it. They will be too busy with each other to notice us. Or if they do, it will be too late. Worry not. And it is of no matter, we keep a keen watch. If an army approached, surely we would see it coming. Then we would tear it to pieces.
Sisters, hearken to my words. This prisoner camp holds many of our comrades. We shall march forward and liberate them wherever we find them bound. See? One cage lies nearly within reach. It is a sign! Strike them down! Come, sisters! You are freed!
Sisters, aim true!
Praise the Emperor! Servitors! We must erect a forward camp, with speed!
Build protocols confirmed.
Lord Tauren, enemies have infiltrated by way of the torture gardens. How was this allowed to happen?
I don't know, Archon. They killed the guards. They amassed a force and will soon have a war camp established.
I see. I will inform Lord Vecht. Have the soul cages readied. They shall taste the full fury of our powers.
Lord Vecht is here? On Lacune?
Yes, now go! The soul cages!
If I must die, I shall welcome death.
You fool! I will have your head for this! Quickly, back to Conora. Well, If he had died, I should have taken his place. Now I must flee.
What the Canoness Selena Agna found in the Dark Eldar moon base confirmed every suspicion she had harbored regarding these debased aliens. Such a vile race must be cut out, like a tumor, wherever it manifested. It required all her faith to look upon the atrocities and depravities she found in that place and not go mad. The chaotic powers that twisted the nature of the Dark Eldar made them remarkably strong, but not as strong as the Sisters of Battle, who smote, purged, and pulverized every vestige of taint they found on the moon of Lacune. All that dark iniquity was consumed in flame, and the valiant Sisters of Battle did not rest until the ground beneath them was thoroughly cleansed and sanctified. It may never be known what first awakened the cold legions of the Necron from their vast burial vaults in the southern coast of Kaurava 3. Archives suggest that Imperial Guard survey crews may have been dispatched to coastal Imosa several months before the conflict. Others point to the strange and unknown influence of the warp storm, which could somehow have roused the deathless Necrons from their slumber. Out of the dry Imosan sands, an ancient complex emerged. Part burial ground, part power plant, part staging ground. As builder scarabs removed sands and restored structures to power, its clean-cut, symmetrical, and lifeless form emerged. It pulsed with the green glow of the strange power which fuels the Necrons. Vast reserves of it. Enough to drive an endless stream of monoliths and Necron soldiers. Anyone foolish enough to assail this unearthed necropolis would do well to heed that flow of energy. It is the source of the Necrons' power, and if unchecked, there is little limit to what strength Necrons could marshal against their foes.
So, they come. Awake. I give you energy. Drink of it. And awake. They shall meet their ends. They shall join the army of death.
Canoness, our scouts have identified 4 monoliths outlying the central area. Scans indicate that they are drawing power from there, which is being used to awaken them.
They must be stopped. There are 2 strategies. Cut off the flow, or smash them quickly.
the point! We have excelled in battle!
Take it back.
We may not be.
Sisters of Battle, who piously hold all forms of alien life in disdain, treated the Necron threat with the greatest disgust possible. A Sister of Battle's highest hope was martyrdom in her Emperor's name. Ultimately, this revulsion at the Necrons must have fueled the Sisters' passion in the heat of battle and brought them to their righteous victory. The sight of a Necron city half uncovered from beneath the Emosan sands conjured for each and every sister the enormous monstrosity of their foe. Defeat was unacceptable. Such a thing could not be permitted within the reach of the Imperium. The sisters' fury and their inspired acts of faith fully overwhelmed the Necrons. Even the manifestation of one of their Catan gods, the Deceiver, could not salvage them from the purging fire that always goes before the triumphant Sisters of Battle, burning alien, heretic, and mutant alike. More than any other race, the Eldar concerned themselves with the distant past and the distant future. In visions, Farseer Keris anticipated the reawakening of their ancient foes, the Necrons and Kaurava III. A webway gate, unused for many millennia, flickered to life. In the blink of an eye, a barren tract of the wasteland planet became a sprawling base of operations, and the Eldar army poured forth from it. Just as quickly, this stronghold vanished from the naked eye, concealed by Eldar artifice. The Eldar had learned long ago that no bulwark, no matter how strong, could halt the slow, implacable progress of the Necrons. Only illusion, deceit, and misdirection could accomplish that goal. And these are things at which the Eldar are peerless. The Eldar had prepared a harrowing gauntlet for their invaders, with all the feints and deceptions they could muster. This stronghold was not just a foothold, not just a key strategic point, not just home to many Eldar secrets. No! Through its long history, it had become sacred to the craft world Eldar, and they would defend it accordingly.
They approach. We are prepared.
Yes, Farseer, but
Yes?
must we fight?
We shall fight. They must never suspect. They shall come, expecting the obvious, the simple, the artless. They shall stab at the shadows with confused minds and troubled hearts. Meanwhile, we shall appear unseen from 10 directions, and from every one, strike a fatal blow.
Do you know the history of this place, which we call Esselir Talith and the young races call the Upper Wastes?
We, the Eldar, made our war camp here. In a past age?
Yes, that is so. Our ancestors came here to fight the Necrons when they were an overwhelming wave that swept the worlds. This system was one of their stages of destruction, their foundries of undeath. Our ancestors defeated them here. We constructed our war operations center here as an illusion. No brute army, no simple display of force could uncover its secrets, and none ever shall. No, it is more than an illusion. It is a clever trap, this place our ancestors forged. It is a net covered in leaves that the savage beast willingly stands on, tempted by a bloody morsel, only to find itself hoisted, trapped, at the hunter's mercy. No, we shall guard our secret. No force can strike a target it cannot find. We shall not yield up our foothold on this world. Kaurava was once ours, and shall be ours again.
Come, sisters. Down there is the Elder stronghold. We will purge it with fire and claim this land in the Emperor's name.
They are upon us, Farseer. Is it time?
Almost.
In
Not
your
yet.
name we bring
Now,
now
quickly to safety.
Canoness, the chapel and servitor have arrived. The operation may commence. I suspect the road before is long and winding.
How little you understand, Eldar. You have stepped into our snare. Do not expect to escape it alive.
By the Emperor's wrath, you will pay for these feeble deceits.
Weary of fighting its shadows and illusions, we will always elude you. Leave now while you can.
What? Yet another Central Command discovered? These wretched Xenos are infuriating! It seems there is an unknown type of energy being emitted from several locations in the field of battle. Perhaps it would be best if we shed some light on these...
Emperor, be my light!
Farseer, they have disabled one of the illusion barrier devices.
Then the other ones must not fall.
Another illusion barrier was destroyed, Farseer.
I see. We shall prepare for the worst.
They have disabled all the illusion barriers. This should never have come to pass. We have few chances left. We must fight. We must prevail. Even our shining eagle squadron could not stop them.
We came here long, long ago.
Strike them down!
We did battle with our deathless foes, the Necrons, and won. This day we have lost. If they swarm again like locusts here, some other must stop them.
Feel our wrath! Strike them down! I am hit! I am hit! I'm wounded.
For we shall be gone.
Selena Agna viewed the Eldar as she did every other alien race, as enemies of the God Emperor. She knew of their ancient and advanced civilization, but to her this only made them rivals to the Emperor's primacy. Bolstered by her adherence to the doctrine of the Ecclesiarchy, the Canonists marched against the Eldar, declaring them natural enemies of the Imperium. The many ruses and deceits of the alien enemy could not prevail against the Sisters of Battle, religious zeal, and devastating flames. Following the victory and the necessary prayers and ablutions, Canoness Agna ordered the ancient Eldar stronghold cleansed. Almost all the Eldar technology was burned and cleared away. The upper wastes were ritually purified and declared territory of the Imperium and dominion of the Ecclesiarchal Sisterhood. On arriving in the Kaurava system, Confessor Turganum March had remarked to Canoness Selena Agna that he would not be surprised if the place were so corrupt that it all must be put to the torch. In retrospect, these words seemed prophetic. Everywhere they looked, the Sisters of Battle found only weakness, heresy, and abomination. Chaos had nearly devoured the entire system, beginning with the fourth planet. Added to this was the warp storm, which had vanished shortly after the defeat. It hardly seemed likely that any Imperial Guard or Space Marines could have avoided corruption in such circumstances. Although tragic, it was necessary to perform a field inquisition and purge every one of them. When the Sisters of Battle had finished their cleansing, the star system was officially dedicated to their order. Relics of their great victories during the Kaurava conflict were placed in the founding of 6 great ecclesiarchal cities, each devoted to one of the orders militant of the Sisterhood. Pilgrims journeyed from across the galaxy to these retreats, and many millions of sisters gathered there for prayer and preparation in the bastion of Holy Kaurava. The Sisters of Battle rely greatly on their faith. It is their sustenance and their shield. When they first came to the tainted world of Kaurava, Confessor Turganum March was quick to see how much holy light and fire it would take to cleanse the 4 planets. He therefore brought the living Saint Anais and placed her in their primary bastion in Sama on Kaurava 1. Following a secret and ancient practice, the living saint was imbued with the inviolable aura. An aura of invincibility, which would prevent any chance, he thought, of defeat. Guarded at the last by this inviolable aura, the Sisters of Battle marched with great surety. Who, in truth, would dare oppose them? What adversary could faith and fire not sweep from before them? In the face of chaos and vile aliens, the Sisters of Battle merely redoubled their fervent prayers and penances and fought on. They came to believe that glorious victory was the only outcome. The idea that any would dare attack their mighty bastion was unthinkable. The possibility that their bastion could fall beyond belief.
Good, she comes.
Sisters, the living holy saint of the Emperor, Saint Anais, scourge of heretics.
Now, in the name of the Emperor!
Good.
There, it is done. May the Emperor's blessing carry us on to victory, sisters!
We thank you, honored martyr.
So... it is true, then. These blessed shrines will confer... invincibility?
Indeed. Within each shrine lies a true and sacred relic of the ecclesiarchy. Now that the edifices have been blessed by a living saint, they confer upon her the inviolable aura, as scribed and fervently mastered by the great ecclesiarch Jonasiah Vuonis.
And wherever she goes, no harm may befall us?
Precisely. Neither our persons nor our belongings.
One pure bright candle amidst a sea of filth and darkness!
That is well said, Canoness. This is a tainted system. It may, in fact, be irredeemable.
Then we shall purge it with fire. I have yet to find a cinder that was not faithful in its praise of the Emperor. All is made ready?
Yes, mistress.
Good! These would-be conquerors shall have a taste of our fire and faith. The Emperor will punish them through us.
Unworthy fools! You shall not harm this holy place!
It is true, then. These blessed shrines will confer... invincibility. And wherever she goes, no harm may befall us?
Precisely. Neither our persons nor our belongings.
Leave nothing but cinders.
Your blasphemy
We are under
is
attack!
annulled!
The weak fight back! Chaos!
Sisters, our foes have shattered 2 of the shrines. We must defend the remaining 2 to our last pious breaths.
Blood. Bring blood!
Shrines in ruins.
My shrines! In ruins! Woe unto us!
Kill bird! May kill bird!
Sisters, we must go as martyrs! We must go in flames! In flames!
Guts had fought the Blood Ravens before, and he knew they were good enemies. Blink your eyes and they'd give you a good stomping. This time, though, he figured it was them that had blinked, and him and his boys who would be doing the stomping. Still, when the war reached the northern reaches of Kaurava too, those Blood Ravens put up a right good fight, and tore up plenty of orcs before Gorguts closed in and squashed them good. Those boys that made it took plenty of trophies and skulls, and the mechs got their green paws on plenty of the humans' gear. Those orcs that had shown the greatest bravery and skill that day were granted a true honor, promotion to Gorgut's elite personal guard. When Gorgut's Wa came to Kaurava 1, its strength and momentum had reached truly great proportions. For a brief moment, the thick, tiered defenses and heavy munitions of the Imperial Guard's stronghold threatened to stall, or worse yet, break the Warlord's orcish avalanche. And although the pink skins put up a good fight and cost Gorguts many an orc, finally they were stomped flat. This was the first victory the old Kaurava orc clans had ever achieved on the city world of Kaurava 1. The great victory provided a huge morale boost to the entire orc army, and many Wa banners were spontaneously raised there, in Dusala and across all their Kauravan territories. But few orcs were happier than the mech boys, who, in conquering the Imperial Guard's stronghold, laid claim to a vast array of tanks, guns, and other spoils to be modified for orc use. Gorgut's mechs even managed to turn some of the Imperium's war factories to their use, promising readier and cheaper garrisons across Kaurava. On the day that the Orc army smashed the Sisters of Battle, Warboss Gorguts saw such things as he had never guessed could fight under the banner of the Imperium. Although they were no orcs, they had fought heartily enough, and he was not sure that they were any less burny than his burniest boys. He suspected that they even had their own form of Wa. Although anyone knows you can't have a Wa without proper banners. Gorguts and his elite guard claimed many trophies from the gear of the Sisterhood, being a type of human soldier they had heard of, but never before encountered. For years to come, the formidable war boss was obsessed by the winged flight of the living saint who had fought him, going so far as to ask his best mech boys to see about making him wings of a similar kind. When Warboss Gorguts set his sights on Kaurava 4, he knew that sooner or later he would square off against the Alpha Legion. By and large, the Great Orc did not pay much attention to the subtle differences between the different human armies. But he knew the Chaos Space Marines under Chaos Lord Faravius Charon wielded great powers, and so was eager to test the strength of his orc hordes against such a foe. The greatest challenge for Gorgut's army was the unnerving face that the legions of chaos present to their foes. What the Alpha Legion had in horror and the dark powers of chaos, the orcs made up for in sheer numbers, size, and strength. When the battle was won, Gorguts allowed the Kauravan boys to loot their skull trophies, weapons, and other prizes, while a giant Wa banner was planted where once a chaos vortex had been. By the time that Warboss Gorguts, avalanching Wa, rescued Lacune, there was little that the Dark Eldar could have done to defend themselves or escape with their lives. Thinking their moon base safe from notice or harm, they had squandered any chance of rebuffing the orcs that they could possibly have gained. Taril's humiliating defeat sent him, Asdruba Elvect, and sundry other Dark Eldar fleeing back into the webway to their home city of Komara. Meanwhile, Gorguts and his orc mobs had invented a new sport, which involved putting Dark Eldar into their own cages and seeing how far they could throw them in the moon's reduced gravity. Several knobs attempted to harness and tame the warp beasts they found, but without any luck. Gorguts did not let his orcs linger for long, however. Ultimately, Lacune was one in a line of provinces to be crushed by his unstoppable Wa. As far as War Boss Gorguts was concerned, the Necrons were no more than a vast army of little mechs. True enough, some of the boys seemed a bit unnerved by the dark metal battalions that massed like a lake at the base of the exhumed necropolis on the Emosan coast. But Gorguts simply made sure that they were more frightened by him, and they fought good enough. Although he'd had his doubts, the victory over the Necrons was as good a proof as any, in Gorguts' eyes, that the Kauravan boys were worth their squigs. They had a tough time of it, descending into the bowl of death among the hot sands. But as Gorguts figured these things, Orks were for fighting, and there was nothing better than a good, hard fight so long as you won. Sure, that Deceivi thing had come up, and turned his boys' heads this way and that, but they beat it good in the end. If War Boss Gorguts had learned anything in his many years leading the Orks, it's that the Eldar, or pointy ears, were trouble, and it was best to crush them as soon as you had the chance. When his caravan boys found themselves in the hot sandy barrens of the Upper Waste, he gave them a good talk, warning them that they'd have to be the sharpest-eyed, fastest, choppiest orcs ever known. While it might not be said that the Orks anticipated every move of the quick-witted and devious Eldar, they certainly proved that Orkish strength and resilience could stand up to any such trickiness. Pressed hard by the avalanche of Orks, the Eldar fought frantically, and then, overwhelmed, succumbed. The fact that some Eldar, including the Farseer carries, were able to retreat to their last webway gate before the advancing Orks troubled Gorguts very little. He had won. The Orks scoured the area, uncovered the many caches and depots hidden within the stronghold's grounds, and smashed a great deal of it with triumphant enthusiasm. The warlord Gorguts took it as a personal affront that the Tau had chosen a base of operations on the moon directly above the Ork enclave in the Rockclaw Mountains of Kaurava II. More offensive still was the Arca Cannon, which exemplified the Tau principle of fighting from a safe and tactical distance. Of course, almost anything could offend Gorguts, and he would have come to attack the Tau sooner or later just because they were there. Had Commander Orska succeeded in finishing the defenses of his moon-based fortress, the Orks might have beaten themselves bloody against its shielded outer walls. Unfortunately, the smallest breach in those walls was like a crack in a dam. Once through, the Orks closed the distance on the ranks of fire warriors and crushed them beneath their massive forms. While much was looted by the Ork hordes, Gorguts claimed the Arca Cannon for himself, planning to use the biggest guns he had ever seen to aid his wall. Under the visionary leadership of War Boss Gorguts, the Orks achieved a complete and unrivaled victory over all 4 planets of the Kaurava system. Generations of Kauravan Orks had dreamed of such a day, never imagining that they would not only overthrow the Imperial gods, but 7 other armies to achieve their aim. All Kaurava was soon overrun and teeming with Orks. A phase of wild looting and pillaging was followed by Ork settlement, wherein clans laid claim to entire territories at a time. Without the watchful eye of Gorguts, however, all this would have ended in confusion and petty clan warfare. Morgus had other greater plans. The 4 planets of Kaurava were to be turned to this purpose. Mines yielded valuable metals, and fields of Orkish factories produced everything required for a proper campaign of galactic conquest. A great war, staged from such an excellent platform and supplied with such resilient, war-worthy orcs. How could such a war result in anything but great victories and greater glory? They hailed the mighty leader, War Boss Gorguts, Lord Al Kaurava. Many millennia ago, the Necrons and Eldar had waged epic war across the lands of Kaurava III. And in that distant age, the Eldar had prevailed. Now it was as if that same battle replayed itself, but Vanquisher and Vanquished were reversed. All the deadly might of the Eldar art of war proved useless against the Necron onslaught. All the premonitions and provisions of Farseer Keres failed to match her adversary, the Necron Lord. The other combatants in the Kaurava system had distracted the Eldar. The Necrons grew strong, while the Eldar's strength was whittled away. The Necron Lord, or the dark gods he served, surely took some malevolent satisfaction in the victory over the Eldar stronghold. The Necron army did not stop at the slaughter of all life forms, but trampled every last vestige of the Eldar presence, uncovering many of their ancient supply caches in the process. When the Necron legions arrived in Dusala Precinct, the Imperial Guard made every preparation to rebuff their advance. Unfortunately, few walls are thick enough, and few batteries of cannon are heavy enough to stop the Necrons once they are moving in full force. Despite all the tanks, artillery, and tactics he could muster, General Stubbs was helpless against the deathless tide, and the Imperial Guard were overwhelmed. The victory was not swift, but it was absolute. The day after the battle, not even the corpses of guardsmen were to be found. Only a host of new Necron soldiers and new monoliths where Imperial bunkers had formerly stood. The Necrons had even discovered the vast generators that had powered the many factories of the Dusala Precinct, and harnessed the energy for their own terrible purposes. The brave soldiers of the Order of the Sacred Rose had fully believed themselves girded and steeled against all assault, most of all in their own bastion on Kaurava I. So their surprise was great indeed when the Necrons came upon them with irresistible force, making mockeries of their flamers, tanks, and acts of faith. Those weapons might have sufficed against the mortal and the living, but alas, the Sisters of Battle faced an entirely different sort of foe. A foe which no prayers succeeded in averting or casting down. The Necrons swarmed across the cities of Sama District, swallowing whole all that moved, and crushing all that did not. After this was done, where prayers and organ music had once been heard, silence reigned. Silence, except for the dull throb of the Necron generators and the dull thunder of the Horde marching off into the distance. The ancient Catan gods, who guide the actions of the Necron multitudes, look bitterly upon the Chaos gods as upstarts and rivals. The Necron troops marched in mindless ranks, overwhelming the Alpha Legion just as they would any other living opponent. And yet, there was almost a vindictive air to the thoroughness with which they slaughtered the vanquished soldiers of Chaos, smashing their shrines and laying waste to their buildings. The Imperium, Eldar, and Tau looked on as one of the forces of evil was thoroughly annihilated. However, as formidable a threat as Lord Feravius Charon and his Alpha Legion Marines had been, their defeat was in no way encouraging. Could any living force halt the tidal wave of Necron death as it crashed over the planets of the Kaurava system? Under the war banner of war boss Gorgut's Headhunter, the Orks of Kaurava had proved themselves tough, capable warriors. Their numbers, brute strength, and tenacity could not be overestimated. Neither Gorguts nor his army, however, were prepared for the deathless legions of the Necrons. Undaunted by the fearsome reputation of the Orks, the Necron shadow swept in on the Rocklaw Mountains. They coursed through the mountain paths and poured into the ancient stronghold sacred to the Kauravan Orks, which had never before known intruders. Although the Orks fought bravely, and many who died that day should have been sung heroes, all fell, crushed beneath the flood. This decisive battle spelled the end of the Kauravan Orks. The Necron methodically hunted every last Ork down. Strangely, several reports suggest that an Ork rocket blasted off from the Rocklaw Mountains, just at the moment of the Necron victory. Still, even if Gorguts were aboard this rocket and made it to safety, the Kauravan cause was lost for the Orks. The brutality with which the masses of Necrons crushed the Nanyanoi moonbase was one of the bloodiest episodes of the Kaurava conflict. It had been suggested that had the Tau completed their advanced defenses on the base, the Necrons would have been easily deflected. However, others contend that few walls have ever withstood the full force of a Necron onslaught. The sack of the moon base was a bitter lesson for the leaders of the Tau military. They saw the death of a revered ethereal and a noted commander as a terrible failure to embody the philosophy of the patient hunter. It was haste and hubris, they reasoned, that had caused the ruin of their ambitions. The Necrons, meanwhile, with cold efficiency, had gathered the dying and captive Tau, Kroot, and Vespids. They were given to the flayed ones to practice their ghoulish art upon, in preparation for the next battle. In his last moments of life, Force Commander Boreal suddenly understood the full extent of his error. He had completely underestimated the threat of the Necron horde. With terrifying force, they had poured across the borders of the lands of solitude, slaughtering all in their path. As the last flicker of consciousness was dissipating from his clouded eyes, the great Space Marine reviewed all that had passed, and saw that by the time his scouts had spied the Necrons through their scopes, his defeat was already inevitable. The Space Marines must revise their protocols. Segmentum must be warned. And with that single thought, Boreal tried to rise. But the fingers of a cold, lifeless hand were suddenly clamped around his arm. His soul had not yet left his body, and now it was destined for a more terrible fate than death. He would never join the God Emperor. The battle between the Necrons and Dark Eldar armies, although both were undoubtedly evil, was in many ways a struggle of life versus death. For the Dark Eldar were devotees of life, feasting on its vibrancies and its excesses. The Necrons, for their part, stood only for death and cold, brute power. Unfortunately for the Dark Eldar, the weapons of horror and suffering were entirely lost on the unfeeling, metal-bodied Necron army. Indeed, where the Dark Eldar remained a small and agile force, the Necrons multiplied until they were a sea without number, an advantage which served them greatly in overwhelming the Dark Eldar stronghold. As they killed each other on the field of battle, did either side remember that once, in a past age, they had also been mortal enemies at war? Perhaps this memory deepened the bitter despair of the Dark Eldar as they fought and died. Perhaps there was a gloating air of vengeance to the Necrons as they crushed them. Once, in another age, the Necrons had fought a great war in the Kaurava system and lost. Awakened again, so many millennia later, they found new, strange, and terrible armies around them. This time, however, profiting from the confusion of the living, they would not be denied victory. Soon, the planets teemed with the dark forms of the Necron army. Great tomb ships stood guard while others launched on excursions of conquest. In all doings, their enemies succumbed quickly in confusion and terror. This was no accident. Where the Kaurava Necrons went, their god, the Great Deceiver, ever clouded the minds of their foes. It was the Necron threat that had originally brought the Ulthwe Eldar to the Kaurava system. There could be no greater satisfaction to Farseer Karis than to lead her troops to victory against them, just as her ancestors had in an age-long past. As her forces spread over the necropolis of Emosa, exterminating every last stray Necron warrior, she felt a great peace come over her soul. The future grew clear, and she foresaw the lifting of a great cloud from the place. The glory and renown that Karis' forces had won that day was great indeed. The Necrons had been allowed to nearly complete the process of exhuming their city of death. They had even summoned a manifestation of the hated and reviled Catan god, the Deceiver, to their aid, and all in vain. Truly, the battle this day was every bit as great as that of yore. And yet, she knew this enemy far too well. Her warriors would seal the many crypts, and afterwards bury the foul city in sands once again. But Karis knew the Necrons could never permanently be defeated. A warlike vigil must be kept, and peace brought to bear at any cost, so that the deathless ones should sleep long and undisturbed. Farseer Karis, upon arriving in the Kaurava system, was wary of the Imperial Guard presence there for several reasons. First, she could not have forgotten the treatment her predecessor, Farseer Taldir, had received on Lorn V and Cronus by the leaders of the Imperium. Second, the likelihood was far too great that the Imperial Guard had a hand in the waking of the Necrons on Kaurava III, and possibly the Warp Storm on Kaurava IV as well. Soon, the Farseer resolved to remove the 252nd Conservator Regiment from the conflict. The Imperial Guard's defensive position in the Dusala precinct turned out to be extremely well defended. But General Stubbs' men could not withstand the Eldar's superior tactics and skill in battle, and after a grueling struggle, were vanquished. In taking control of the region, the Eldar were able to repurpose some of the manufacturing pipelines, greatly improving the ease of construction and deployment within the battle arena. The Eldar knew well that the Sisters Militant would endeavor to exterminate any army outside of the Imperium, and possibly any force within it. Farseer Karis ordered the attack on the Sisters of Battle stronghold in the Sama district purely as a preventative measure. In the end, it was well that she acted when she did. The Battle Sisters proved formidable at their current strength. Any further delay could have resulted in disaster for the Eldar cause. By defeating the Order of the Sacred Rose, the Eldar removed yet another obstacle from their path. The Imperium had squandered its claim on the region, allowing disaster to run rampant. It was high time that Kaurava saw wiser, more capable stewardship. The Eldar generally prefer to arrange events so that the Imperium and not themselves are the ones fighting against chaos. In the Kaurava conflict, however, Farseer Caris believed that the chaos threat was too great for anything but a direct assault. The failure of the various Imperial forces to peaceably cooperate was one ill omen. The eruption of the Warp Storm and the speed and ferocity of the Alpha Legion's expansion was an even greater one. The war between Eldar and the Chaos Space Marines was relentless and destructive, as both sides possessed and fought with powerful psychic abilities. The Alpha Legion had all the power of the Warp at hand to call upon, but despite this advantage, they were finally overcome by superior Eldar tactics, guided by the powers of Farseer Caris. In this time of war, the Eldar quickly erected certain containment fields to limit the dangers of the Warp Storm, and left the uncertain work of fully disabling it for some time after a hoped-for Eldar victory. Since they had been aware of their presence in the Kaurava system, the Eldar had watched their debased kin with disdain and some fear. At last, the time came when the schism that had long ago divided the Dark and Craftward Eldar resulted in direct conflict. Perhaps the Archon Taril's kind had grown weak or complacent in the safety of their moonbase. Whatever the cause, they were unprepared for the force of the assault which Farseer Caris led against them. With the cold inevitability of fate, the Eldar swept the Blackheart Cabal forces from the surface of the moon, along with all evidence of their depraved deeds. Caris issued specific orders, however, to allow the small number of fleeing Dark Eldar to escape. It was her full intent that news should reach the Dark Eldar home city of Komorrah of her victory and their defeat. She had not been long in the Kaurava system before Farseer Caris sensed the danger posed by an Ork war there. But the time was not right, and so she waited and watched. Lines and threats invisible to any ordinary tactician appeared to her, and then at last, she knew she must move. Although superior in number, strength, and barbarity, the Orks could not match the advanced strategies of the Eldar. Like a fine and deadly blade, Caris' forces pierced the heart of the ancient Orc stronghold. Their victory was unequivocal. Unfortunately, the war boss, Gorguts, somehow eluded the Eldar force. All the same, his role in this war was ended, and that was victory enough. Farseer Caris saw with clear sight that her forces must strike the Tau moonbase of Nanya Noi soon, or not at all. When she arrived at the Kauravan moon, she realized how close this window had been to shutting. Had the Tau completed their advanced fortifications, their mighty base would have been nearly invincible. The Eldar must strike, and swiftly. Caris trusted no other force to keep vigil over the ancient and deathless Necrons, and be watching still a millennium hence. The dauntless Farseer had weighed the consequences of her actions carefully, and many times since she had first foreseen the coming of the Kaurava conflict, she knew that the Tau, though a young and foolish race, showed greater promise than the haughty Imperium. the mad legions of chaos, or the dogged orcs. The exarchs of Craftworld Ulthwé had agreed that although brazenly striking the Tau might sever any non-hostile relations for some centuries, the Tau could not yet be trusted in any system so susceptible to Necron awakenings. Nevertheless, the bodies of Aun Roir and Commander Eska were returned to the Tau, along with all prisoners of war, as a token of respect. Farseer Karis found herself more and more troubled by visions concerning the Space Marines. Should the Blood Ravens meet with success, several outcomes were possible, and too many involved devastating victories for either the Necrons or the rapacious Dark Eldar. Either through ignorance or provocation, the Space Marines would unleash horrible forces on the galaxy. What the Eldar must do was clear enough, although a daunting task. Guided by her foresight and the wisdom of her ancestors, the Farseer led her army to the lands of solitude, and there made a bold strike against the famed soldiers of the Imperium. She would, of course, have preferred less direct methods, but there was no other way. While the Eldar loss of life was terrible, they did succeed in subduing the Blood Ravens, and their duty was fulfilled. While the battlefield was being cleared, and the Eldar dead ritually lamented, Farseer Karis pondered her army's next move, reflecting on the terrible price that is sometimes paid for peering into the tangled skein of the future. At the end of the bloody contest, only the Eldar army remained standing. The Necron had been returned to the depths of Kaurava 3, and all those who would meddle, pillage, or spread chaos throughout the galaxy were gone. Farseer Karis had succeeded in her task. She had led her people among the branching roads of the future to the best possible of ends. The Ulthwé Eldar then scoured the planets of the Kaurava system, destroying all vestiges of the war, machine and soldier alike. All, that is, except for those Imperial Guard troops who had somehow survived the defeat. These surviving Guardsmen eventually contacted Segmentum Command. When fresh Imperial forces arrived, no trace of the victors could be found. What had taken place could not be explained. A new Imperial regiment was instituted, this time under greater ecclesiarchal surveillance, and rebuilding began. Strangely, however, all efforts to colonize the third planet met with inexplicable disaster. Eventually, embarrassed and unable to explain, the new Governor-General simply abandoned the planet. Occasionally, he would receive strange reports of slender, swift-moving figures and alien-looking arches which would appear and then vanish again without a trace. Lord Feravius Charon had grown weary of the pestilential nuisance of the Dark Eldar, and felt the time had come to crush them under the pitiless hammer of his Alpha Legion Chaos Space Marines. Had the Dark Eldar refrained from conducting raids on their chaotic comrades, they might have prospered in safety upon Kaurava 4's single moon. But alas, their time had come. The Archon Tauriel's band of pillagers were no match for a full army of Chaos Space Marines. Unable to hide or run in their own base camp, the Dark Eldar fell before the invaders' fire. The Dark Eldar who were not slaughtered or fled found themselves subject to their vanquishers' cruel games. The heretic Chaos Space Marines made sport of their victims in the very cages and torture chambers in which their own brethren had been made to suffer. A just reward indeed, from the evil to the depraved. In truth, the Necrons and the forces of Chaos have little in common other than their enemies. Where one is a cold and silent army of death and dominion, the other revels in wild noise, mutation, and action. When the Alpha Legion found themselves standing above the cold necropolis that had emerged from the Emosan sands, they saw not just a foe, but the one thing which in their mad power and zeal they feared and abhorred: subservience, silence, the void. In the Battle of Emosa, the wild powers of the Chaos Gods proved themselves in every way superior to the older Catan gods of death. Even when one of these gods, the Great Deceiver, was summoned to fight in corporeal form against the Alpha Legion. By the time they were done, nothing was left of the ancient Necron city. All had been toppled, shattered, and smashed to dust. Frustrated by their elusive tactics, Chaos Lord Feravius Charon felt a growing ire towards the Eldar. His longing to crush these troublesome foes, combined with his desire to claim the barren lands of the Upper Wastes for a great temple and testament to the powers of Chaos, ensured that the Alpha Legion would attack at their stronghold without great delay. Soon Lord Charon could wait no longer, and his Chaos Space Marines struck with deadly might and fury. They thwarted the many tricks and traps that Farseer Keris set, unleashing havoc in their wake. After the enemy were routed and the Farseer had fled, Charon loosed his men to hunt and torture the remaining Eldar. After nothing living was left, the Chaos Space Marines took to looting and destroying the Eldar structures and stores. The Tau were wholly unprepared for the fury with which the forces of Chaos assailed their moon base on Nan Yanoi. With no innate relation to the warp, and no psychers at their command, the Tau could not anticipate the many augmented powers that made the Alpha Legion such fearsome adversaries. The tortures and foul ceremonies performed upon the helpless Tau that were not fortunate enough to die in battle are beyond description. Within hours of the sack of Nan Yanoi, the base was covered in its defenders' blood, and the carcass of their beloved Ethereal hoisted upon the barrel of the Arca cannon, the one piece of the Tau base that Lord Charon did not see fit to desecrate. Over the course of thousands of battles, the Chaos Lord Feravius Charon had developed cruelly keen instincts. Charon felt that he must crush the Orc threat soon, or risk losing his foothold in the Kaurava system. He consulted his head sorcerer, only to have his suspicions confirmed by a divination. Gorged on bloodshed and strong with chaos, the Alpha Legions crushed the Orc forces. They tore through the ancient Orc stronghold, an enclave untouched by intruders for millennia. While his crazed, victorious soldiers butchered and burned the vanquished army, Lord Charon stalked the ground suspiciously, looking for Gorguts, his nemesis. Again, his instincts had proved true. The Great Orc was nowhere to be found. Still, the victory was won. No Orcs would trouble the ascendancy of Chaos. When Chaos Lord Feravius Charon set foot upon the outer edge of the Lands of Solitude, he could feel his greatest of victories fast approaching. Already, he had beaten the legendary Blood Ravens back to the very door and left them cowering in their own stronghold. Emboldened by this turn of events, the Alpha Legion pressed on towards the headquarters of their ancient enemy, and there engaged in battle. If the Blood Ravens had not fought so well, Lord Charon would not so thoroughly have relished their defeat. His Alpha Legion Chaos Space Marines, with chaos coursing through their veins, with screams and great acts of barbarity, had countered the enemy at every turn, until victory was won. Although the dead Space Marines were horribly desecrated in the aftermath, it was those who somehow survived that were truly to be pitied. The dying Commander Boreal was forced to watch many of these unspeakable atrocities before the last trickle of life drained from his body. Lord Charon dedicated the lands of solitude to chaos, renaming the land in demonic Segrebriot. But his men called the place another thing entirely, Raven's Blood, for all that they had shed that day. With their arrival in Kaurava 4, Lord Charon's forces had wiped out in a single blow the 253rd and 254th Conservator Regiments of the Imperial Guard. Then, after crossing the entire system in a war path of blazing conquest, they came to face the 252nd Regiment in their heavily defended city stronghold. The Alpha Legion no longer had the element of complete surprise, or the warp storm to their advantage. But the result was the same: utter victory for chaos. The Alpha Legion considered this conquest a strike against the Imperium itself. Lord Charon let his Chaos Space Marines, cultists, and other forces loose upon the city. The guardsmen were rounded up. Those that did not turn over to chaos immediately did so out of madness after a little torture. And very few died faithful to their false emperor. Although Stubbs himself had somehow escaped, the broken bodies of his top officers were set up high upon a stage as a token and trophy of the day. Second only to the Space Marines, the Alpha Legion found a natural enemy in the Sisters of Battle. If anything, the Sisters Militant stood even closer to the false Emperor, whose destruction they were sworn to perpetrate. In the Order of the Sacred Rose, the Soldiers of Chaos saw more than revolting pious zeal. They saw manifest evidence of the Emperor's powers through the Sisters of Battle's many acts of faith. Spurred by these considerations and the active threat the Sisters of Battle posed, Lord Charon resolved on a direct attack. He would prove definitively the superiority of the Chaos Gods. The Alpha Legion Chaos Space Marines certainly proved their own superiority that day, routing the Sisters of Battle and spurning their powers, prayers, and their living saint alike. Of the dark ceremonies and horrible atrocities that the victorious soldiers of chaos perpetrated there in the Sama district, it is not best to give a full account. Under the orders of Lord Charon himself, however, several particularly horrible examples were blasted into space, in a path that would surely be intercepted by an Imperial battle fleet. Once, there was a simple soldier who was ignorant that he possessed latent abilities as a psyker. Without training, he could not guard himself, and the gods of chaos whispered to him, driving him feverishly mad. They made him carry out certain plans, perform certain black rites, so that a terrible rift in space and time was forged. Chaos poured out. The Alpha Legion appeared, and the warp storm blossomed from the rift. The gods gloried in their deed. Led by Chaos Lord Feravius Charon, the Alpha Legion spread, slaughtered, and conquered. No force, Not even the mortal enemies, the Imperial Space Marines, could withstand the wrath. 9 armies vied for the Kaurava system, and chaos proved mightiest of them all. The 4 Kauravan planets now teem with the strange and twisted forms of chaos. Demons walk openly, and the warp storm grows in size and strength. The Alpha Legion, under Lord Karen, make ready for a far greater war against their oldest and most hated of enemies, the Imperium of Man. Commander Orks had personally seen several engagements with the Orks, and considered them entirely beyond hope of reform. So when the Tau learned the location of the Orc stronghold, directly beneath the Nan Yanoi moonbase, it was only a matter of time before they would need to be eliminated. Although no match for the Orcs in close combat, or in numbers, the strategies and the weaponry of the Tau allowed them to achieve complete victory. The ancient mountain base, which had never before known a successful assault, was split open under the vice-like pressure of the Tau military. The Tau did not hesitate to claim the remote mountain enclave for their own. Teams of fire warriors and Kroot scoured the mountains for Orcs who had fled, while survey teams mapped the terrain. It was only after a thorough analysis of the battle that Orks realized that somehow the Orc warlord Gorguts had escaped. Still, there was little doubt that he would not be waging war in Kaurava anytime soon. As the Tau commander, Orks plotted his careful strategy for the subjugation of the Kaurava system, he was troubled by the danger posed by the Blood Ravens. Their position on Kaurava, too close to the Nan Yanoi moonbase for comfort, was only one of many reasons for his unease. The time had come when Commander Orks felt he must strike the Space Marines or risk their strength growing to rival that of the Tau. As always, he found that the cautious deliberation with which he faced the challenge resulted in prosperity and success. The Blood Ravens fought remarkably well, but their defense was disorganized and inefficient. Taking advantage of this, Orks' forces pressed the Space Marines until they faced defeat. In Commander Orks' address to his troops, following the battle, he praised the Blood Ravens for their valor in combat, and concluded with the admonishment that, without the guidance of the greater good, surely it would have been the Tau who perished in defeat. Although many armies now marched across the planets of the Kaurava system in hopes of dominance, the Imperial Guard had something the others did not. Their stewardship of the system for millennium granted them organization and infrastructure which the Tau, who looked upon Kaurava as a future addition to their empire, could not help but admire. The earth, fire, and water castes were all in agreement that the factories, maps, and communication pathways would reduce the colonization process by hundreds of years, if captured and repurposed. Thus, it was as much for administrative as military purposes that the Tau made war on the 252nd Conservator Regiment's Central Command on Kaurava 1. With calm efficiency, Commander Orks' forces pierced, overwhelmed, and routed the Imperial Guard. Once victory had been achieved, the Tau claimed the vast military-industrial complex for their own, taking those guardsmen who would renounce Imperial allegiance under the safe wing of the greater good. Commander Commander Ores Ka was perturbed by the religious zealotry which he witnessed in the Sisters of Battle. In it he saw, perhaps, a twisted mockery of his own devotion to the greater good. When the Tau brought their military might to bear on the Sisters' stronghold, they found the challenge a perfect example of the closed-minded and closed-fisted approach of the fanatical humans. The remarkable powers that the Sisters of Battle displayed, though they amazed the Tau, could not turn the tide of the battle, and the Tau prevailed. It was with some surprise that the Tau found they could not take prisoners of war among these humans, as they had often done in conflicts with the Imperial Guard. The foolish humans insisted on dying beyond all reason. When the battle was fully won, Commander Ores Ka ordered the city of the Sama district scoured, so that they could learn the technology that had produced invincibility, and the other marvels that had been used against them. Strangely, this technology was gone, and the Tau were unable to account for it. Tau Commander Ores Ka had long watched the Chaos threat, and felt that the aggressive presence of the Alpha Legion could no longer be tolerated. The promise of Kaurava as a new and important sept in the Tau Empire was too enticing to permit such a threat to remain. All the ordered military strength of the Tau was brought to bear on the peninsula of Isolt. The Chaos Space Marines, though fearsome warriors, buckled beneath such a constant and unswerving assault. Commander Ores Ka knew better than to try and take prisoners, or parley at all with the survivors among the ranks of Chaos. Instead, his army removed itself for the powerful Arca cannon to fire repeatedly on the defeated stronghold until it was certain that no life could possibly remain there. In a system slated to be annexed into the Tau Empire, there was no place for the barbaric piracy of the Dark Eldar. Until the time that they were prepared to attack, Commander Ores Ka was barely able to tolerate the savage raiding and dishonorable tactics of the Black Heart Cabal. Now, their time had come. With ordered effectiveness, the Tau were able to take the Dark Eldar off their guard, swiftly scattering their forces and obliterating all that did not flee back into their webway retreat, where the Tau could not follow. It is unfathomable, Commander Ores Ka later wrote, how this wanton and senseless people could bear any relation to the craft world Eldar, one of the only powers in our galaxy who possess some hope of one day embracing the greater good. The Tau Firecast believed that they had learned a great deal with regard to the Necrons in the War of Cronus. It was therefore with some dismay that Commander Ores Ka found the deathless and unreasoning foe headquartered in an entire city, half exhumed from beneath the Emosan sands. His fire warriors had shown themselves capable of dispatching the slow-moving legions from a distance. But who could say what new forms of the enemy lurked in this strange necropolis? A fire warrior, however, is trained from an early age to cleave to truth, to observe the greatest discipline, and to accept all threats with calm reserve. Even the ancient god, the great deceiver, could not cause their rout. Indeed, the wise teachings of the greater good were tried and proved on this day. Following the traditional victory ceremonies, Commander Ores Ka oversaw the careful destruction and sealing of the Necron city before the Sea of Sand was returned to cover it. Since arriving in the Kaurava system, the Tau Commander Ores Ka had watched the Eldar forces closely. Puzzled by their presence, he had endeavored to grasp the nature of their interest in the conflict. Unfortunately, Ores Ka was unable to know the ancient feud between the Eldar and the Necrons, or interpret the actions of Farseer Karis, who led not by strategy in the Tau sense, but by powerful visions of future dangers. To him, the Eldar were on an inexplicable warpath. Although he could not reconcile this with past knowledge of the Eldar, he determined that their presence in Kaurava was incompatible with the greater good. The hot, dry lands of the upper wastes were an advantage to Commander Oreska's fire warriors. With their calm discipline and well-orchestrated tactics, they drove the Eldar from the field. Oreska ordered his warriors to allow fleeting Eldar to escape. But after the battle, the land was scoured for webway gates, all of which were destroyed. The great commander hoped that in this fashion, the Eldar would hear of the Tau's superiority and benevolence, and one day join them under the banner of the greater good. Defeating 8 powerful armies was a potent demonstration of the great strength, great strike tactics which Commander Oreska espoused. Although his theories had been met with skepticism before, his superiors now debated the merits of such strategies and ways to incorporate them into standard Tau warfare. With the Kaurava conflict definitively settled, Commander Oreska's first cautious step was to complete and upgrade the defenses of the Nanyanoi stronghold. Meanwhile, the Warp Storm, which was the purported reason the Tau had entered the Kaurava system, silently folded in upon itself and vanished. With the Warp Storm gone, the Tau fleets began to make their way to Kaurava untroubled, and a massive colonization project then began. Commander Oreska was not to stay in the system which had found peace and the greater good. Instead, the ethereal Aun Roia assumed leadership, guiding the way towards Kaurava, becoming a full-fledged sept of the Tau Empire. In terms of fighting orcs, the Blood Ravens found as great a challenge in the Rocklaw Mountains as any they had ever faced. First was the difficulty in assailing the mountain stronghold itself. Second were the tactics of the infamous war boss Gorguts, whose prowess grew greater with every campaign he fought and survived. As great as the challenge was, the Blood Ravens proved themselves matchless soldiers, undaunted by any foe. After overcoming the Orc hordes and laying waste to their ancient enclave, the Space Marines proceeded to hunt down every last Orc they could find in those mountains. There was only one blemish in the Space Marines' otherwise flawless execution. Gorguts himself somehow eluded their grasp. Some reports attested to a crude rocket which took off at the battle's end, while others claim the blast was a timed bomb, closing off a tunnel entrance to cover the Great Orc's escape. To Commander Indrik Boreal's company of intrepid Blood Ravens, the Nanyanoi Moonbase's reliance on defense, unholy technology, and indirect fire were anathema to all they stood for. To defeat such an enemy was to prove, in Boreal's mind, that the superiority of his men could conquer all. Of course, the Tau saw their defeat differently. The tragic loss of a revered ethereal and famed military commander was interpreted after the fact as a failure to employ sufficiently rigorous methods. Having little use for static defenses, Boreal left only enough men as were required to hold their conquest. No more. The commander thought that once he had claimed the Kaurava system for the Imperium, the moon would make a fine depot for the Adeptus Mechanicus. It is the wish of every Space Marine to seek revenge for the bloody wars of the Horus Heresy, when the loyal chapters battled the heretical traitors and earned themselves a place in the history of the Imperium. Force Commander Indrik Boreal knew well the fervor with which his men would fight, and strove to perfect his battlefield tactics so he could grant them the victory and glory which was, he felt, their due. Boreal's company of Blood Ravens acquitted themselves more than admirably against the Alpha Legion. Although they waded through miles of corrupted land into the very heart of the Warp Storm, where maddened cultists danced and chanted, and phantasmal horrors wafted through the air, not a single soldier swerved from his faith or duty. The Blood Ravens were proud soldiers that day in the eyes of their commander, their order, and the entire Imperium. On that day, history was made, and they knew glory. The Blood Ravens looked down on and despised the cowardly, skulky methods of warfare that the Dark Eldar employed. Still, these vile Xenos posed a sufficient threat to the system and had to be dealt with. It was time to give them a taste of their own tactics. The Space Marines struck their moon base with force, and the element of surprise, routing the Blackheart Cabal and rendering them a non-threat to Imperial forces. Of the Space Marines recovered from the torture grounds and slave chambers, many had been so tortured or mutilated that they were no longer fit for service. Still, undergoing these privations was no dishonor in the eyes of the Brothers Space Marines, and they were sent out directly for medical treatment and inquisitorial review. When Force Commander Boreal ordered his men to attack the Imperial Guard in the Dusala precinct of Kaurava I, he knew full well what he was doing. There was no doubt in his mind that his actions were in the right. First, the 252nd Conservator Regiment was under great suspicion regarding their possible role in the Warp Storm's outbreak. Second, by offering resistance to Commander Boreal and his Blood Ravens, it was the Imperial Guard that was defying proper authority. Once the superior military tactics of the Blood Ravens had overwhelmed the 252nd Regiment and laid claim to their central command, the surviving guardsmen were treated as fellow comrades in arms. Commander Boreal ordered them safely return to Segmentum Command, where, unfortunately, few were likely to survive Inquisitional debriefing. Claiming the factories and munitions for their own, the Blood Ravens made ready to assume temporary stewardship of Kaurava's 4 planets. The charter of the Blood Ravens' 9th Company in the Kaurava conflict was undeniably clear. Stabilize the system, defeat all forces of chaos, and neutralize any opposing force. When the Sisters of Battle gave them direct opposition, it was necessary that they be removed from the stage of battle. The Sisters of Battle, of course, were also acting on their own orders, following similar instructions to brook no opposition. Evidently, there was not enough room for more than one Imperial force in the system. Unfortunately, for the Sisters of the Order of the Sacred Rose, they were no match for the battle-hardened super soldiers they were forced to fight. Although the Sisters of Battle defended themselves admirably, they were handily overcome. Once vanquished, the Space Marines treated the surviving Sisters of Battle with the utmost deference, giving them swift medical aid and providing them with passage back to the Convent Sanctorum on Ophelia 7. The famed soldiers of the Blood Ravens chapter were no strangers to the dread Necron legions. However, unlike the vast underground labyrinth they had fought on Cronus, the Space Marines here found a vast and terrible city buried in the sands of the Emosan coast. Vast energy conduits pulsed beneath their feet, feeding power to a host of monoliths and a cold, lifeless army. Commander Boreal had been ready for all this. What he had not counted on was having to face a manifestation of the Catan god, the Great Deceiver. But even this ancient menace could not keep the Blood Ravens from victory. Their deeds that day would be scribed and illuminated in the Imperium histories for perpetuity. Afterwards, the Space Marines spent several days combing the sands of Emosa, destroying every last Necron before leaving the area to special demolition crews. Taking a lesson from the Cronus War, every suspicious stretch of the coast was repeatedly detonated to ensure against further Necron awakenings. Having been fully briefed on the recent Eldar interference on Lorne 5 and in the conflict over Cronus, Force Commander Indrict Boreal kept a wary eye on the armies of Farseer Keris, although he might have made a cautious ally of the stern Eldar leader in other circumstances. Boreal did not hesitate to attack her stronghold in the Upper Wastes when the opportunity presented itself, in order to ensure the Blood Ravens' complete subjugation of the Kaurava system. Boreal knew that in a direct attack, he was facing a shrewd tactician whose instincts and battlefield wisdom might well exceed his own. Nevertheless, he had full faith in his Marines to overpower and outmaneuver the Eldar at every opportunity. The gamble paid off, and the Blood Ravens took the day. The Space Marines found evidence suggesting an Eldar presence in the Upper Wastes that was surprisingly ancient. However, other than a small number of supply caches, the base consisted of very little, as the Eldar relied heavily on their webway. It was no surprise that only the likes of the Blood Ravens should prevail in a battle so hard-fought and entrenched as the Kaurava conflict had proved. Under the capable guidance of Force Commander Indric Boreal, the Ravens' 9th Company had acquitted themselves faultlessly. It was unfortunate that, in following their orders, they had been compelled to neutralize the armies of the Imperial Guard and Sisterhood. But such was war. Without doubt, the finest hour the Blood Ravens had known was the triumph over the vile forces of chaos. A Space Marine can aspire to no greater honor than fighting and defeating those treacherous blasphemers. Within days of the Blood Ravens' victory, the Warp Storm had vanished as mysteriously as it had come. After the war was won, a new fortress monastery was founded in the lands of Solitude. That territory was given a new name, Borealum. Meanwhile, fresh Imperial Guard troops were brought to the Kaurava system to constitute a new and better regulated planetary defense force. When the Sisters of Battle arrived in the Kaurava system, General Stubbs knew there was only one way he and his guardsmen would make it through alive. No victory or act of penitence could clear them from suspicion by the reckoning of those ecclesiarchal zealots. Knowing that he had done no wrong, and unwilling to submit to inquisitorial reconditioning, the general prepared for battle. At first, Stubbs had hoped that the enemies of the Imperium would spare him the unwelcome task of pitting his men against the feared and dreaded Sisters of Battle. Unfortunately, Stubbs did not feel he had the luxury of waiting for mutual enemies to do his dirty work. He resolved on a bold and desperate move to attack the Sisters of Battle's headquarters directly before they could come to him. With the advantage of surprise on their side, the 252nd Regiment, although weak of will and faith, showed themselves stronger in arms and armor than the pious Sisters of Battle. This extraordinary feat surprised even General Stubbs, and on congratulating his troops afterwards, he remarked that it was certain proof that the Emperor had willed the Imperial Guard to hold dominion over the Kaurava system. The fact that General Van Stubbs was forced to attack the Space Marines directly was, to him, merely an unfortunate necessity of the war. Stubbs had every respect for Force Commander Boreal. After his Imperial Guard forces had outgunned and overpowered the Blood Ravens, he felt great regret that the commander's life could not have been spared. That, of course, was impossible. No Force Commander would ever flee or surrender while his company fought and died. The few Blood Raven Space Marines who had been unable to die honorably were given prompt medical treatment and dispatched to Segmentum Command. The dead were given all the honors and funeral rites due to their station. These proceedings, however, did not for an instant deter General Stubbs from installing a company of his guardsmen in the lands of Solitude, or laying claim to the usable munitions and other equipment left intact. The loss of good Imperial Space Marines was regrettable, General Stubbs reflected. But the charter of his regiment and his own personal ambitions had, after all, left him only one course of action. The Kaurava system had known strife between the Orks and the Imperial Guard long before the present conflict, in the form of isolated outbreaks and outright war. But before this time, the Guardsmen had faced the Kauravan Orks alone, who were never as organized or aggressive as now, under the leadership of War Boss Gorguts. Unfortunately for the Orks, the Imperial Guard was also fighting under a new leader. The determined General Stubbs dogged Gorguts right into the Rocklaw Mountains, farther than the Imperial Guard had ever penetrated, and there dealt his Wa a mortal blow. While the Orks of Kaurava were thoroughly defeated, less is known concerning the great Ork war boss himself. Imperium scanner logs indicate that an Ork craft did take off from the scene, but any other information was lost to the heat of the battle. The guardsmen of the 252nd Regiment, who had fought in the Battle of Rocklaw, took on the proud moniker of Orks Bledders, and the mountain itself came to be known as Stubbs Peak. General Van Stubbs' heroic conquest of the Nanyanoi moonbase meant the end of any true Tau threat to the Kaurava system. In fact, the breach of their technologically advanced fortress and the death of their Ethereal rendered the Kaurava conflict a bitter memory to the Tau. It would be centuries before the Tau would again consider any attempt to expand into Kaurava. Before the troops, General Stubbs showed disdain for the impressive Tau fortifications and battlements. Even if the outpost had sustained little damage in the assault, it would be unbecoming of pious servants of the Imperium to show too much interest in alien and heretical technology. More quietly, however, Stubbs had many Tau artifacts and weapons secreted to Segmentum Command. knowing well that he could curry favor among his superiors if their study should reveal new insights into Tau military function. While his men celebrated, looted, and vandalized the Xeno stores, General Stubbs smiled to think of the progress he was making on an undeniably ambitious career path. There can be little doubt that the 252nd Conservator Regiment's assault on the Chaos Space Marines was fueled by a sense of lost honor and credibility. While a final judgment could wait centuries in Segmentum's martial courts, General Vance Stubbs knew well that the warp storm had erupted on the Imperial Guard's watch, and that many suspected heresy among their ranks to be the cause. Whether to make amends for their failures, or to prove their detractors wrong, the brave men of the 252nd fell upon the enemy on Kaurava 4 with all the force, armor, and firepower at their command. Under the rigorous command of their new general, the men became brave and resourceful. In such high spirits, and hoping that the defeat of Chaos would banish the warp storm with it, General Vance Stubbs declared it a day of celebration, to be commemorated by all Imperial residents of Kaurava forever afterward. Effigies in the Alpha Legion colors would be burned, and guardsmen paraded and honored as was their due. During the Kaurava conflict, the Imperial Guard were some of the hardest hit by Dark Eldar hit-and-run tactics. These raids, often small in size, came under the cover of darkness and at lightning speed. Often, the guardsmen on duty would not have returned a single shot before the Dark Eldar ships were speeding away, laden down with captives and other spoils. The Dark Eldar penchant for speed, fear, and striking from the shadows served them poorly. However, when they found the 252nd Conservator Regiment pounding on their door, no amount of running or hiding could save them. The Imperial Guard swept over the Blackheart Cabal's compound on the moon of Lacune, crushing everything under its mighty martial treads. The Imperial Guard soldiers were horrified at the tortured and mutilated comrades they saw there. And when their victory was near, this was channeled into a vindictive rage, which did not subside until the enemy's buildings and vehicles were shattered, leveled, and then crushed into dust. Had the 252nd Conservator Regiment, under its former commanders, ever taken their census and survey duty seriously, the ancient Necron stronghold of Kaurava 3 would probably have been awakened hundreds of years prior to the Kaurava conflict. Whether their failure to keep any presence on this wasteland planet was remarkable luck or dismal negligence is now debated heavily by Imperial historians. Invigorated under the capable command of General Stubbs, the Imperial Guard showed their best face, and everything that the ancient exhumed necropolis set against them were beaten back with ample munitions, perseverance, and heavy armor. Adapting the example set in the War of Cronus, General Vance Stubbs had cargo loads of bombs shipped to the Emosan Plains, and every inch of possible Necron catacomb was subject to multiple detonations. Following the victory, Stubbs forbade any future Imperial surveys of Kaurava 3. The fact that an ancient Eldar stronghold had resided on Kaurava 3 took the 252nd Conservator Regiment entirely by surprise. Something that General Vance Stubbs was not pleased to hear of. After sending the officers responsible for intelligence on Kaurava 3 to the firing squads, General Stubbs undertook to remove all non-Imperial presences from the planet. Although the strategies and technology of the Eldar far outmatched his abilities, the fearless general marshaled firepower and heavy armor to great advantage, finally revealing, cornering, and removing the Eldar forces from the face of the map. What the Imperial Guard found after the battle was evidence of an Eldar military presence older than theirs, and, in fact, older than the very Imperium. General Stubbs paused only a moment to wonder at this, before ordering nearly all of the Eldar structures and artifacts summarily destroyed. In Stubbs' mind, Kaurava 3 was a waste planet, good for mining a few necessary military installations, and no more. The upper wastes would make a finer low-grade outpost for the Imperial Guard. The 252nd Kauravan Conservator Regiment proved the right to rule in no uncertain terms. General Vad Stubbs' ability to organize and reform this long-neglected army did not go unnoticed by the Segmentum top brass. His career could not fail to rise, in time, beyond the role of Governor-General to a small star system. For the time being, however, Stubbs busied himself and his proud regiment in post-war reconstruction. Thankfully, the warp storm vanished of its own accord. Kaurava 4 was suitable for resettlement. Only Kaurava 3 did not feel the commotion of construction, mining, and terraforming. This planet was left largely barren. Who could say what else slept beneath those sands? In time, the system became a proud Imperial hub, and famed Guard academies turned out superior infantry, second only to Caster itself. Kaurava became home to proud human populations, warlike and devoted to the Emperor. In these times, it would be hard to imagine that a bloody war had been fought, or that heresy and chaos had ever been there. To the mind of Dark Eldar Archon Taril, the Imperial Guard were a true conundrum. He thought of them as a burgeoning tree, hanging heavy with ripe fruit. And yet, the tree bore thorns, and the fruit was cased in hard shells. At last, the Archon had been pricked one too many times by those thorns, and the time had come to take his blade to the tree's trunk. The heavy armor and artillery of the Imperial Guard's Central Command were aggravating to Taril's forces. But with terror, poison, and savage speed, they crushed the Imperial Guard regiment. The job was well done. With the tree felled, its fruit were all close to the ground, and Taril could gather them with ease. Some they feasted on, and some they set aside for their masters. The Dark Eldar then turned their sights on victims with softer shells and fewer thorns. From the moment that Archon Taril's raiding force crossed into the Sama district, it was a contest of speed versus flame, of jagged and poisonous wickedness against stiff and narrow zeal. Unfortunately for the Sisters of Battle, the ruthless force with which the Dark Eldar struck them was simply too great. The marauders of the Blackheart Cabal were like a dark torrent, crashing through the Imperial city, smashing the Sisterhood's battlements. The Dark Eldar swooped down on many of the Sisters of Battle with such speed that they had not time to make martyrs of themselves. Instead, they would become the slaves and playthings of the debased Dark Eldar. One lone Sister of Battle they tortured to the point of madness, then left where she could someday strike fear into the hearts of others by muttering of the horrors she had seen. The bumbling forays of the Orc armies had irritated Archon Taril one too many times, and he grew weary of their presence in his battlefield. It was without much difficulty that the Dark Eldar, keen of eye and ear, found the supposedly secret mountain fortress of the Kaurava Orks. The sheer number of these green brutes rendered the stronghold's sack quite difficult, but Terrell prevailed. Many Orc corpses festooned Raider and Ravager decks. Orcs in great number were taken as playthings for Terrell, his homunculus Grumenahel, and as tribute to the elders of Komorah. Hellions and Reavers were sent through the narrow mountain passes to hunt Orcs that had fled. During all these proceedings, Lord Tarl himself scoured the camp for his adversary, Gorguts, but in vain. The Archon had looked forward with great pleasure to personally eviscerating the Orc war boss. Still, they had sent him scurrying in fear, and that would surely suffice for now. The mighty, if incomplete, fortifications of the Nan Yanoi moonbase had been constructed to withstand masses of invasion fleets and heavy weapons. In their many careful preparations, the Tau had not considered the sheer brutal speed of the Dark Eldar. Perhaps because previous encounters with the Dark Eldar had not left survivors for the Tau to learn from. Regardless, the attack was so swift and so overwhelming that many fire warriors did not have time to arm themselves and die nobly in combat. They would instead come to find themselves in a hell beyond imagining, in the torture cells of Lacune and Komorah. After the battle, Asdrubal Vecht himself graced the scene of the conquered base and presided over the vile banquet held on the night of the victory, personally feasting on the heart of the dying Ethereal. There are few things the Dark Eldar fear, but many are the things they hate. In the eyes of the Archon Terrell, these Bloodraven Space Marines were a grand object of disgust. They stood for order and the upstart human race, and worst of all, claimed to be warriors second to none in the galaxy. To hate, the Archon added insult. The idea that any should be feared so much as his own Blackheart Cabal was a personal affront. The time had come to prove his superiority and punish the Bloodravens for their offense of existing. Terrell was greatly pleased when he vanquished the famed soldiers, but was even more elated at how worthy an adversary the Space Marines proved. One can weary of docile playthings, but no Dark Eldar ever feels so alive as the moment when one stands victorious, having narrowly skirted defeat and death. The Archon considered it the greatest compliment to the slain Bloodraven commander when he placed his severed, shrunken head on the upper tassel of his war belt. The Battle of Solitude was a memory the Archon would cherish for many years to come. When the Dark Eldar first arrived in the Kaurava system, they had been happy to conduct the raiding parties against the Alpha Legion as often as any of the other warring forces within their grasp. However, the Chaos Space Marines' position directly below their moonbase stronghold was simply growing to be too great a threat. Archon Terrell took all but two leaders as fools in the Kaurava conflict, Farseer Keris and Lord Charon. These two alone might know where in the shadows to look for his fleets of raiders and ravagers. As the Dark Eldar power grew great, Lord Terrell saw his chance and decided to wipe the Alpha Legions from the system. With ruthless speed and efficiency, his savage forces descended upon the peninsula of Isolt. The savageries and abominations of chaos, rather than dismaying them, merely whetted their appetites for slaughter and mayhem. Although the Alpha Legion fought heroically, they were overwhelmed and outmaneuvered. The Black Heart Cabal raiders took cultists and wounded Chaos Space Marines by the hundreds, dividing their spoils between tribute to their masters and use in a great feast of souls to follow the victory. Although it was in a different age that they parted ways with their Craft World relatives, the Dark Eldar had not forgotten the dark and bloody wars between their ancient kindred and the Necrons. The fiendish machines made poor victims of Dark Eldar piracy. They were always armed, and although their frames did encase souls, those were feeble and sour, and could not be tortured before reaping. Defeating the Necrons was a necessary and grim task. Although they took less joy in the endeavor, the Dark Eldar fought with no less ferocity. They danced and fired before their deathless foes with vicious abandon. The Necron legions could not stop them, and neither could the threat of the great monoliths. Not even the appearance of the Great Deceiver, summoned into corporeal form, could avert the Dark Eldar's victory. Alas, no celebrations followed. They took no slaves and pillaged no goods. Their duty done, Taril's forces fled the place in search of foes who could bleed and plead and cry out in pain. Eldar do not easily forget. The dark branch of their kind, who many millennia ago had split from their Craft World cousins, still looked back on them with a kind of hatred that can only stem from personal betrayal. Since they had arrived in the system, Archon Taril had kept a wary eye on the doings of the Eldar Farseer. Debased by nature, he could not restrain himself for long against the provocations of this ancient hatred. When he felt he was strong enough, he and his bloodthirsty raiding band fell upon the Eldar stronghold of Esel Ir Tanil, which the Imperium had named the Upper Wastes. Archon Taril and Farseer Kiris were pitted one against the other, speed for speed, trick for trick, evasion for evasion. But in the end, it was the Dark Eldar who struck the final blow. The wild pleasure that his warriors took in defiling the captured Eldar was far greater than it could have been for any other race. Of course, the bulk of hostages were reserved for tribute to Taril and his superiors. Yet, in spite of all his bounty, Taril was deeply pained to learn that Farseer Kiris had escaped and might never be made his personal plaything. Still, the victory was great and would raise his standing among the Archons of the Black Heart Cabal. With the last major threat removed, the Dark Eldar were now free to roam through the Kaurava Sector, pillaging and laying waste as they saw fit. Like gruesome locusts, the Black Heart Cabal darkened the skies with their vehicles, descending on territory after territory, laying claim to prisoners and other spoils. The speed and ravening hunger with which these raids were carried out was remarkable. Nothing could escape them. Nothing could outrun them. The keen senses of the Dark Eldar seemed to pierce all cover in search of their prey. It was not long before all Kaurava was stripped bare and devoid of life. Back on the moon of Lacune, cages grew full of captives, and more cages were built. Archon Taril and his master, Lord Vecht, sat and supped goblets filled with the souls of their enemies. The homunculus Grumenael cackled gleefully over his victims. As the warp storm quietly disappeared, so too did the Dark Eldar vanish, returned to the webway, to revel, then go in search of new, fresh worlds to pillage and enslave.